The gunshot that echoed through the mountains that morning would change everything. But Fletcher Campbell didn't know that yet as he stood on the wooden platform of the Truckee, California station, watching the steam engine pull away without her. It was April 1878, and for the 181st consecutive day, Fletcher had walked the half-mile from his ranch to the train station, carrying with him the same worn photograph and the same stubborn hope that had kept him going since October. The other ranch hands thought he had lost his mind. His brother had stopped asking questions 3 months ago. Even the station master, a gray-haired man named Morris who had seen his share of broken dreams roll through this Sierra Nevada town, had started setting out coffee for Fletcher without being asked. A small kindness that spoke volumes about what everyone believed, but nobody dared say out loud. The photograph was creased at the corners from being handled so many times. Fletcher pulled it from his vest pocket now, as he did every day after the train departed, studying the face of the woman who had promised to come. Fiona Sinclair. Her dark hair was pinned up in the photograph, her expression serious in the way people got when they sat for a portrait. But he remembered the smile she had given him when they said goodbye in St. Louis remembered the warmth in her green eyes when she had whispered that she would come to him, that nothing would stop her. 6 months ago she should have been on that train. They had planned it all so carefully. Fletcher would go west first, establish himself, buy land, build a house. Fiona would settle her father's estate, sell the mercantile, and follow in 6 months' time. 6 months had turned into 7, then 8, then 9. The letters had stopped coming in December. Fletcher had sent 14 telegrams to every contact address she had given him. Nothing but silence answered back. He walked back toward town, his boots kicking up dust on the dirt road that served as Truckee's main street. The town had grown considerably since the railroad came through, perched as it was along the route of the Central Pacific, nearly 6,000 feet up in the mountains. The cold still bit hard this time of year, snow patches lingering in the shadows of the buildings despite spring's arrival. Lumber mills and ice houses dominated the economy here, along with the constant flow of travelers heading to and from the silver mines in Nevada. Fletcher ran cattle on 200 acres just outside town, land he had purchased with money saved from 5 years of working as a ranch foreman in Wyoming. The house he had built sat empty except for him, 3 bedrooms waiting for a family he had imagined with such certainty that the absence of it felt like a physical wound. He was 28 years old, and he had been ready to start his life. Instead, he was trapped in this strange limbo, unable to move forward, unable to let go. The Lucky Silver Saloon was just opening when Fletcher passed by, and the owner, a friendly woman named Margaret who ran a respectable establishment, called out to him. "Any luck today, Fletcher?" "No, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He didn't stop walking. He had work to do, cattle to check on, fences to mend. The physical labor helped, kept his mind occupied for hours at a time. His horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Drummer, waited at the hitching post where he had left him that morning. Fletcher swung into the saddle and turned toward home, letting Drummer set an easy pace. The ranch hands were already out when he arrived. 2 brothers from Colorado, Sam and Jake, who worked hard and didn't gossip. They had been with Fletcher since he started the operation, and they knew enough not to ask about his daily trips to the station. Fletcher checked on the herd, counted heads, inspected a section of fence line that needed repair. The work was good, solid, the kind of thing that built a future. He just wasn't sure anymore what that future looked like. That night, lying in bed in the too-big house, Fletcher stared at the ceiling and let himself think the thoughts he kept locked away during daylight hours. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she had met someone else. Maybe the feelings they had shared during those 3 weeks in St. Louis had been nothing but a dream, something that felt real in the moment but couldn't survive the harsh light of separation and time. Maybe he was a fool for waiting, but when morning came he got up, got dressed, and walked to the station again. 300 miles away, in a small room above a boarding house in Sacramento, Fiona Sinclair woke to the same nightmare that had plagued her for months. In the dream, she was always running, always trying to reach the train, but her feet moved through mud that grew thicker with each step. She woke gasping, her heart racing, her hands clutching at sheets that were damp with sweat. The room was sparse, containing only a bed, a washstand, and a trunk that held everything she owned. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, and from the street below came the sounds of the city waking up. Wagons rattling past, vendors calling out their wares, the general chaos of Sacramento in full swing. It was a far cry from the quiet streets of St. Louis, and even farther from where she wanted to be. Fiona rose and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, splashing her face, trying to wash away the lingering tendrils of the dream. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who looked older than her 26 years. The illness that had struck her down in December had stolen weight she couldn't afford to lose, leaving her face gaunt, her cheekbones too prominent. Her dark hair, which had once been her vanity, hung limp and lifeless. She barely recognized herself. The journey west had been a disaster from the start. She had left St. Louis as planned in October, but a cholera outbreak in Kansas City had quarantined her train for 2 weeks. By the time she reached Denver, it was November, and early snows had already closed several of the mountain passes. She had waited in Denver for 3 weeks, sending letters to Fletcher, explaining the delays, promising she was coming. Then the coach she finally managed to book had been robbed outside Salt Lake City. The bandits had taken everything: her money, her jewelry, the packet of letters Fletcher had written to her, even the warm coat she had packed for the mountain winters. A kindly Mormon family had taken her in, helped her recover from the shock and the cold, but by then it was December, and she was stranded with no money and no way forward. She had taken work in their household, helping with cooking and cleaning, trying to save enough for passage to California. That was when the fever struck. Pneumonia, the doctor said, brought on by exposure and exhaustion. For 3 weeks she had burned with it, hovering in that strange space between life and death, delirious and helpless. When she finally recovered enough to travel, it was February. The family loaned her money for a ticket to Sacramento, insisting she pay them back when she could. But Sacramento was as far as their generosity could stretch, and she arrived in the city with less than $2 to her name. She found work at a laundry, brutal labor that left her hands raw and her back aching, but it was honest work and it paid. Every penny she earned went into a jar hidden in her trunk, money for the final leg of her journey to Truckee. The worst part was the silence. Her letters had been lost with her luggage. She had tried to send a telegram from Salt Lake City, but the lines had been down due to winter storms. In Sacramento, she had gone to the telegraph office, but the cost of sending a message was a day's wages, money she couldn't spare when every cent brought her closer to Fletcher. She had reasoned that it was better to save the money, to arrive a few weeks later rather than send word and then be delayed again. But weeks had turned into months, and the weight of that silence pressed down on her like a stone. Did he still wait? Did he think she had abandoned him? The questions circled her mind constantly, vultures picking at her resolve. But she had made a promise, and Fiona Sinclair kept her promises, even when it cost her everything. She dressed in the simple calico dress that served as her daily uniform and went downstairs to the kitchen, where the boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, was already preparing breakfast. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and stayed, carving out a life through sheer determination and shrewd business sense. She had been kind to Fiona, offering her a discount on the room in exchange for help with the morning cooking. "You look tired, Mrs. Chen observed, her English accented but clear. "Bad dreams again." "The same one," Fiona admitted, reaching for an apron. "How much longer do you think?" Mrs. Chen knew what she was asking. They had counted the money together just yesterday. 3 more weeks, maybe 4. "Unless you want to arrive with nothing." Fiona nodded, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. 3 more weeks. After 6 months, what was 3 more weeks? But the thought of Fletcher waiting day after day, thinking she wasn't coming, tore at her heart in ways she couldn't articulate. They worked in companionable silence, preparing eggs and rice, frying salt pork, brewing strong coffee. The boarders began to drift down, railroad workers mostly, and a few miners heading up to Nevada. Fiona served them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, took their thanks with a nod, and returned to the kitchen to count the coins they left as tips. Every penny mattered. That afternoon, she walked to the laundry where she worked the evening shift. The city was bustling, Sacramento having established itself as a critical hub for the railroad and for commerce heading to and from San Francisco. The streets were a mix of mud and boardwalks, lined with buildings that ranged from elegant hotels to rough shanties. The Chinese community was strong here. Whole neighborhoods where the signs were written in characters Fiona couldn't read, where the smells of unfamiliar spices drifted from cookhouses and made her stomach growl despite herself. The laundry was owned by a man named Mr. Peterson, a stern-faced Swede who paid fair wages and demanded hard work in return. Fiona scrubbed and pressed and folded for 6 hours, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered to Truckee, to Fletcher, to the life that waited just out of reach. When she left that night, Mr. Peterson handed her the week's wages, and she clutched the coins tight, adding them mentally to the growing total in her jar. Soon she would have enough. Soon she would board that train and travel the final miles. Soon she would see Fletcher again and explain everything, and he would understand, and they would finally begin the life they had planned. She had to believe that. It was the only thing keeping her going. Fletcher stood on the platform on a morning in late April when Morris, the station master, finally broke his customary silence. "Son," the old man said, his voice gruff with something that might have been pity, "you got to stop this. Whatever happened to your girl, she ain't coming. 6 months is too long for delays. She would have sent word." Fletcher looked at the older man, seeing the concern in his weathered face, and felt something crack inside his chest. "I know what it looks like," he said quietly. "I know everyone thinks I am crazy. Maybe I am. But I made her a promise, Morris. I promised I would be here, that I would wait, that she could count on me. If I stop coming, if I give up, then what does that say about me? What does that say about my word?" Morris was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "It says you are human. It says you got a life to live. Ain't nobody would blame you for moving on." "I would blame me," Fletcher said. The train whistle sounded in the distance, and he turned toward the sound, hope and dread warring in his chest the way they did every single day. The train pulled in with a hiss of steam and a screech of brakes. Passengers disembarked. Miners, businessmen, a family with 3 children, an older woman traveling alone. No Fiona. Fletcher watched them all pass, his eyes scanning every face, looking for the one that haunted his dreams. When the platform cleared and the train pulled away, He stood there for a long moment, letting the disappointment wash over him like it always did, sharp and familiar. He turned to leave and nearly collided with a man in a fine suit who had apparently been watching him. The man was middle-aged, with a carefully trimmed beard and eyes that assessed Fletcher with the practiced gaze of someone used to sizing people up. "Excuse me," the man said. "I couldn't help but notice you have been meeting every train. I have been through Truckee 4 times in the past 2 months, and each time you are here. Are you waiting for someone specific?" Fletcher hesitated, but there was something in the man's manner, a genuine curiosity rather than idle nosiness, that made him answer. "My fiancée. She was supposed to arrive last October." The man's eyebrows rose. "October, and you have heard nothing from her?" "Not since December. Letters stopped coming." The man considered this, then reached into his jacket and withdrew a card. "My name is Richard Montgomery. I work for Wells Fargo, managing communications and freight along the western routes. If you give me her name and her last known location, I can make some inquiries. We have contacts throughout the territory. If something happened to her, if she is stranded somewhere, we might be able to find out." Fletcher took the card, feeling a flicker of something he was afraid to name. Hope was dangerous, but he couldn't seem to kill it. "That is very kind of you, sir. Her name is Fiona Sinclair. She was traveling from St. Louis. Last letter was posted from Denver in November." Montgomery pulled out a small notebook and wrote this down. "I will see what I can find. Where can I reach you?" Fletcher gave him directions to the ranch, and Montgomery tucked the notebook away. "I make this run every 2 weeks. I will send word if I learn anything. But son," he added, his voice gentle, "you should prepare yourself for the possibility that the news might not be what you hope." "I know," Fletcher said, "but not knowing is worse than any truth could be." Montgomery nodded, clapped him on the shoulder, and walked away to catch his connection. Fletcher stood on the platform a while longer, turning the card over in his hands, wondering if anything would come of it, or if it was just another dead end in a long line of them. The days that followed were exactly like all the others. Fletcher worked his ranch, met the trains, lay awake at night staring at darkness. But now there was a tiny spark of possibility, the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone might find answers. He didn't let himself dwell on it too much, didn't let himself imagine what those answers might be. He just kept moving forward, one day at a time, because that was all he knew how to do. 2 weeks later, on a morning in mid-May when the mountain snow had finally melted and wildflowers dotted the meadows around Truckee, Fletcher stood on the platform and watched Richard Montgomery descend from the train. The man caught sight of him and walked over, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Campbell," he said, "I have news." Fletcher's heart hammered against his ribs. "Is she alive?" "Yes," Montgomery said, and Fletcher felt his knees go weak with relief. "She is alive. I traced her movements through our freight records and passenger logs. She was delayed in Kansas City, quarantined in Denver, robbed outside Salt Lake City. She fell ill and spent most of the winter recovering. She is currently in Sacramento, working to earn enough money to complete her journey." "Sacramento," Fletcher repeated. The word felt surreal. She was in Sacramento, less than a day's travel away. All this time she had been so close. Why didn't she send word? Montgomery pulled out a telegram from his pocket. "She tried. The telegram office in Salt Lake City has a record of an attempted wire, but the lines were down. She has been trying to reach you, Fletcher. She hasn't given up. She is working 2 jobs, saving every penny. By my calculations, she will have enough for the fare in about 2 more weeks." Fletcher took the telegram, his hands shaking. It was dated December 15th, 5 months ago. The message was simple, delayed by weather and illness, still coming. Wait for me. "All my love, Fiona. She never gave up," Fletcher said, his voice rough with emotion. "She has been trying to reach me all this time." "That appears to be the case," Montgomery said. "I took the liberty of checking on her circumstances. She is staying at a boarding house on K Street, run by a woman named Mrs. Chen, working at Peterson's laundry. By all accounts, she is well, just struggling financially." Fletcher looked up, clarity hitting him like a lightning strike. "I need to go to her. I need to go to Sacramento right now." "The eastbound train leaves in 20 minutes, Montgomery said, a small smile playing at his lips. "I assumed you might feel that way. I took the liberty of reserving you a seat." Fletcher gripped the man's hand, shaking it hard. "Thank you, I cannot thank you enough." "Go get your girl," Montgomery said, "and Fletcher, she must be something special to have fought this hard to reach you. Don't let her go." Fletcher ran. He ran back to town, to the small bank where he kept his money, and withdrew enough cash to bring Fiona home in comfort. He ran to the general store and told Sam to mind the ranch, that he would be back in a few days. He ran back to the station, breathless and wild with anticipation, and boarded the eastbound train just as it was preparing to leave. The journey to Sacramento felt endless despite taking less than a day. The train wound down out of the mountains, through forests of pine and oak, past rivers swollen with snowmelt. Fletcher sat by the window, watching the landscape change, his mind racing. What would he say to her? Would she be angry that he hadn't come sooner? Would she understand that he hadn't known where she was? Would she still want him after everything she had been through? They arrived in Sacramento in the evening, the sun setting over the city in a blaze of orange and gold. Fletcher had never been to Sacramento before, and the size of it overwhelmed him after the relative quiet of Truckee. The streets were crowded even at this hour, full of people and noise and movement. He asked directions to K Street and set off walking, his saddlebags over his shoulder, his heart in his throat. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a neat, two-story building with a painted sign in English and Chinese characters. Fletcher knocked on the door and a small Chinese woman answered, looking at him with polite inquiry. "I am looking for Fiona Sinclair," Fletcher said. "I was told she is staying here." Mrs. Chen's eyes widened slightly. "You are Fletcher," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, madam. Is she here?" "She is working at the laundry, Peterson's on 6th Street. Mrs. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "You wait here. I will take you." She disappeared inside, emerging a moment later with a shawl. Fletcher followed her through the streets, his anxiety mounting with each step. What if she didn't want to see him? What if she had changed her mind about everything? The laundry was a long, low building that leaked steam from every crack. Inside, the heat was overwhelming, the air thick with moisture and the smell of lye soap. Women worked at long tables, scrubbing and wringing, while others manned the pressing irons. Mrs. Chen spoke to a large man who could only be Mr. Peterson, pointing at Fletcher. Peterson nodded and gestured toward the back of the room. "She is at the pressing station," Peterson said, his accent thick. "You can take her for the night, but she must be back in the morning or she loses the day's pay." "She won't be coming back," Fletcher said. "I am taking her home." He walked through the laundry, drawing curious glances from the workers, until he reached the pressing station. There were 3 women working there, all of them bent over their irons, sweat streaming down their faces. He recognized her even from the back, even though she was thinner than he remembered, her hair pulled into a simple braid, her dress worn and stained. "Fiona," he said. She froze. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't turn, as if she was afraid that if she looked, he wouldn't really be there. Then slowly, she set down the iron and turned around. Their eyes met across the steam and the heat, and Fletcher saw everything in her face. The shock, the disbelief, the sudden overwhelming flood of relief and joy and love. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "Fletcher," she whispered, "you came." "I have been waiting for you," he said, crossing the distance between them in 3 strides. "Every single day, Fiona, I have been waiting at that station every single day." She made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and then she was in his arms and he was holding her tight enough that he could feel her heartbeat against his chest, feel her shaking with the force of her tears. She felt too thin, too fragile, and rage surged through him at the thought of everything she had endured, but underneath that was joy so fierce it hurt. "I thought you would give up," she said against his shoulder. "I thought you would think I wasn't coming." "Never," he said. "I promised I would wait, and I keep my promises." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, oblivious to the stares of the other workers, oblivious to everything but the reality of being together after so long apart. When they finally pulled back, Fletcher cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "You are coming home with me," he said. "Right now, tonight. I am not letting you out of my sight again." She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "My things are at the boarding house." "Then we will get them, and then we are going home." They walked back through the streets together, Fletcher's arm around her shoulders, Fiona leaning into him as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. At the boarding house, Mrs. Chen helped them pack Fiona's meager belongings, refusing Fletcher's offer of extra money for the room. "You bring her happiness," Mrs. Chen said simply. "That is payment enough." They found a hotel near the station, a respectable establishment with clean rooms and a dining room that was still serving supper. Fletcher got them a room, painfully aware of propriety even as every instinct screamed at him to keep Fiona close. They went down to the dining room and he watched as she ate, really ate, for what looked like the first time in a long while. She told him everything, the whole story of her journey, and with each detail, Fletcher felt his heart break a little more at what she had been through. "Why didn't you give up?" he asked finally. "After everything went wrong, why did you keep going?" Fiona looked at him, her green eyes steady and sure. "Because I love you," she said simply. "Because I made a promise. Because even when everything was at its worst, the thought of seeing you again was the only thing that kept me moving forward. I wasn't going to let anything stop me from reaching you, Fletcher. Not illness, not poverty, not anything." He reached across the table and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since St. Louis. I will love you until I die. And I swear to you, Fiona, you will never have to fight alone again. Whatever comes, we face it together." She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face, brought back the woman he remembered from St. Louis. "Together," she agreed. They talked late into the night, sitting in the hotel's small parlor, reluctant to part even for sleep. Fletcher told her about the ranch, about the house he had built, about the life he had been preparing for her. Fiona told him about the people who had helped her, the kindnesses that had sustained her through the darkest times. They made plans, tentative at first, then with growing excitement. They would marry in Truckee as soon as possible. They would build their life together, the way they had always meant to. When they finally went upstairs, Fletcher walked Fiona to her door and kissed her goodnight, a gentle kiss that held all the longing and love of 6 months apart. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go home." "Home," she repeated, and the word sounded like a prayer. The train ride to Truckee the next day was nothing like Fiona's long nightmare journey west. She sat beside Fletcher, her hand in his, watching the landscape roll past the windows as they climbed into the mountains. The Sierra Nevada rose around them, Granite peaks still capped with snow, forests of pine and fir covering the slopes. The air grew cooler, crisper, and Fiona breathed it in, feeling as if she was finally, truly leaving the struggle behind. When they pulled into the Truckee station, Fletcher helped her down from the train, and Fiona stood on the platform looking around at the town that would be her home. It was smaller than she had expected, rougher, but beautiful in its own way, nestled in the mountains with wooden buildings lining the dirt streets and the smell of pine in the air. Morris, the station master, came out of his office and stopped dead when he saw them. "Well, I will be," he said. "She is real." Fletcher laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Morris, meet Fiona Sinclair. Fiona, this is Morris. He has been keeping me in coffee all these months." Fiona shook the old man's hand, seeing the moisture in his eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for being kind to him." "Wasn't kindness," Morris said gruffly. "Was just doing what any decent person would do. Welcome to Truckee, miss. This town is lucky to have you." They walked through town, Fletcher pointing out landmarks: the general store, the hotel, the church, the saloon. People stopped what they were doing to stare, word spreading fast the way it did in small towns. Fletcher introduced her to everyone they met, and Fiona saw the shock and delight on their faces, the way they looked at Fletcher with new respect, as if his faith had somehow elevated him in their eyes. The ranch was 3 miles outside of town, reached by a winding road that followed a creek. When the house came into view, Fiona stopped, her breath catching. It was beautiful. A solid 2-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and windows that caught the afternoon sun. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, 2 men came out of the barn, clearly the ranch hands Fletcher had mentioned. "Sam, Jake," Fletcher called. "Come meet Fiona." The brothers came over, their eyes wide. "She is real," Sam said, echoing Morris's words. "We all thought." "I know what you thought," Fletcher said, grinning. "But here she is. Fiona, these are the 2 best ranch hands in California." Fiona greeted them warmly, and they welcomed her with shy enthusiasm, clearly not quite sure what to make of the situation but happy for their boss. Fletcher showed her the house, and with each room, Fiona felt her heart swell. He had built this for her. He had prepared every detail with her in mind. The kitchen had a good stove and plenty of counter space. The bedroom had a beautiful carved bed frame. There were empty rooms waiting to be filled with children, with life, with all the dreams they had shared. That night, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Fletcher had his arm around her, and Fiona leaned into his warmth, feeling safe for the first time in months. "We should get married soon," Fletcher said. "I don't want to wait any longer than we have to." "Neither do I," Fiona agreed. "But Fletcher, I have nothing, no dress, no dowry, nothing. Everything I had was lost." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You have yourself, and that is everything I want. We can get married in the clothes we are wearing for all I care. All that matters is that we say the words and make it official." "I want to marry you in a proper dress," Fiona said. "It doesn't have to be fancy, but I want to feel like a bride, not a refugee. Then we will go to the general store tomorrow and get you a dress. Whatever you want, Fiona, the waiting is over. Now we get to live." They went to town the next day, and the general store owner, a kindly woman named Mrs. Harrison, showed Fiona the fabrics she had in stock. There wasn't a ready-made wedding dress, but there was a bolt of cream-colored silk that had come in on the last shipment, and Mrs. Harrison offered to sew a dress if Fiona could wait a week. "A week is perfect," Fiona said, running her hand over the silk. It was beautiful and far more than she had hoped for. Fletcher paid for the fabric and the sewing, and they made arrangements with the minister for a ceremony the following Sunday. Word spread through Truckee like wildfire, and suddenly, everyone in town seemed invested in the wedding. Women Fiona had never met stopped her on the street to offer help. Margaret from the Lucky Silver insisted on hosting a small reception at the saloon, promising it would be perfectly respectable. Morris offered to decorate the church. The whole town, it seemed, had been rooting for Fletcher all these months, and now they wanted to celebrate the happy ending. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Fiona spent her days settling into the house, learning the rhythms of the ranch, meeting the neighbors. Fletcher's brother, Frank, arrived from his ranch up near the Nevada border, full of apologies for doubting. He was a few years older than Fletcher, with the same brown hair and blue eyes, but where Fletcher was steady and patient, Frank was quick and energetic. He liked Fiona immediately and made no secret of his relief that his brother was finally getting the happiness he deserved. "I was starting to think I would have to drag him away from that station myself," Frank confided to Fiona the night before the wedding. "He would have waited forever. You know that, right? He would have stood on that platform until he was an old man if that was what it took." "I know," Fiona said softly, "and that is why I fought so hard to get here. A man like that, a love like that, it is worth everything." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that felt like a blessing. Fiona dressed in the cream silk dress Mrs. Harrison had sewn, and the older woman helped her pin her hair up, weaving in small wildflowers that Frank had picked from the meadow that morning. When Fiona looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the woman looking back. She looked happy. She looked like a bride. The church was small but packed, seemingly every resident of Truckee having turned out for the occasion. Fletcher stood at the altar in a new suit, his hair combed back, his eyes locked on the door waiting for her. When Fiona appeared, walking down the aisle on Frank's arm, she saw Fletcher's face transform, saw the love and wonder and joy there, and she knew that every hardship, every struggle, every moment of despair had been worth it to reach this moment. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. The minister spoke about love and faithfulness, about the power of keeping promises even when it was hard, and every word resonated with the truth of what Fletcher and Fiona had been through to reach this moment. When it came time for the vows, Fletcher took Fiona's hands in his voice steady and sure. "I, Fletcher Campbell, take you, Fiona Sinclair, to be my wedded wife. I promise to stand by you in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow. I promise that you will never have to face the world alone again. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life." Fiona's voice was thick with emotion when she spoke her vows. "I, Fiona Sinclair, take you, Fletcher Campbell, to be my wedded husband. I promise to be your partner in all things. I promise to fight for us the way we have both fought to be together. I promise to love you with everything I am, today and always." They exchanged simple gold bands, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her with such tenderness that Fiona felt tears slip down her cheeks. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and suddenly they were being swept out into the sunshine, surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. The reception at the Lucky Silver was exactly what Margaret had promised, respectable but joyful. There was food and music and dancing, and Fiona found herself passed from partner to partner as the town's residents took turns welcoming her officially into the community. But her eyes kept finding Fletcher, and his kept finding hers, and when they finally danced together, it felt like the rest of the world fell away. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Campbell?" Fletcher asked, and Fiona loved the way her new name sounded in his voice. "I am perfect," she said honestly. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." They stayed at the party until the sun set, until the lanterns were lit and the music turned soft and slow. Then they said their goodbyes and drove back to the ranch in the wagon, Fiona tucked under Fletcher's arm, the stars bright overhead. When they reached the house, Fletcher carried her over the threshold, and they both laughed at the tradition, at the joy of finally being able to start their life together. That night, in the bedroom Fletcher had prepared, they came together with all the longing and love of 6 months apart. Fletcher was gentle and patient, and Fiona was overwhelmed by the tenderness of it, by the feeling of finally being his completely. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, talking in whispers, making plans and promises, and Fiona felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. The weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery. Fiona learned the routines of ranch life, learned to help with the horses and the cattle, learned to make the kitchen her own. She was a good cook, and the ranch hands made no secret of their appreciation for having hot meals again. She turned the empty rooms into spaces with purpose. A small office for Fletcher to manage the ranch accounts, a sewing room for herself, and 2 bedrooms left waiting for the children they both hoped for. The town embraced Fiona completely. She became friends with Margaret, with Mrs. Harrison, with the other ranch wives in the area. She joined the church's women's circle and helped organize a school for the children of Truckee, as the town was growing fast and needed more structure. She found purpose and community, and it amazed her how quickly this place had become home. Fletcher was everything she had dreamed he would be and more. He was patient and kind, hardworking and honest. He made her laugh with his dry humor, made her feel cherished with small gestures and big ones. He never took for granted that she had fought her way to him, and he showed his gratitude in 100 ways every day. Summer came to the mountains, and the ranch flourished. The herd grew, and Fletcher hired another hand to help with the work. He and Fiona rode out together in the evenings, exploring the land, finding favorite spots where they would stop and talk and watch the sunset. They swam in the creek on hot afternoons, laughing like children. They made love under the stars on warm nights, and Fiona felt her body healing, growing strong again after the hardships of the previous year. In August, Fiona realized that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally confirmed it with the town's doctor, the joy was overwhelming. She told Fletcher that night over dinner, watching as the news sank in and his face transformed with wonder. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hushed. "I am sure," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly. "We are going to have a baby, Fletcher." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and she felt him shaking with emotion. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "I cannot believe it," he said. "After everything, after how long we waited to be together, and now this. Fiona, you have made me the happiest man alive." They told Frank first, and he whooped with joy and insisted on opening a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They told the ranch hands, who grinned and congratulated them. They told the town, and suddenly Fiona was being fussed over by every woman in Truckee, receiving advice and offers of help and baby clothes that had been saved from other births. The pregnancy was not easy. Fiona had bouts of sickness that left her weak and exhausted, and there were days when Fletcher worried himself sick, despite the doctor's assurances that this was normal. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting her do any work, insisting she rest and eat and take care of herself. Fiona found it both endearing and frustrating, but she understood. After almost losing her once, Fletcher was terrified of anything happening to her now. Winter came early to the mountains that year, snow falling in October and settling in deep. Fletcher made sure the house was well stocked with everything they might need, and they spent the long evenings by the fire, reading and talking and planning for the baby. Fiona sewed tiny clothes, her hands moving over the soft fabric with wonder. Fletcher carved a cradle from pine, sanding it smooth and oiling the wood until it gleamed. In February, when the snow was still thick on the ground and the wind howled around the house, Fiona went into labor. It was long and difficult, and Fletcher paced the kitchen while the doctor and Mrs. Harrison attended to her upstairs. The hours stretched on, and Fletcher had never known fear like this, the terror of hearing her pain and being powerless to help. But when the dawn came, so did the baby, and the sound of a newborn's cry cut through the house like a blessing. The doctor came down, exhausted but smiling. "You have a son, Fletcher, a strong, healthy boy, and your wife is fine, tired but fine." Fletcher took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom where Fiona lay propped against pillows, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when Fletcher approached, she pulled back the blanket to show him their son. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on the strange new world around him. "Our son," Fiona said, her voice hoarse. "Fletcher, we have a son." Fletcher sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch the baby's tiny fist. The little fingers immediately curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Fletcher said, his voice breaking. "He is absolutely perfect." What should we call him? They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. But now, looking at their son, Fiona knew. "Thomas," she said, "after my father, Thomas Campbell." "Thomas," Fletcher repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." They spent the next few days in a bubble of exhaustion and joy, learning to care for their son, marveling at every tiny sound and movement. Thomas was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in long stretches, and Fiona recovered quickly from the birth. Frank came as soon as the weather allowed, bearing gifts and congratulations, and held his nephew with surprising gentleness for a man so used to rough ranch work. Spring came again, and with it, the first anniversary of their wedding. Fletcher surprised Fiona with a necklace he had made in Sacramento, a simple gold chain with a small pendant engraved with the date they had met. They celebrated quietly at home, with Thomas sleeping in his cradle nearby, and reflected on everything that had happened in the past year. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real," Fiona said. "That I am here, that we have Thomas, that everything worked out." "It almost didn't," Fletcher said seriously. "If you had given up, if I had stopped waiting, we would have missed this, all of this." "But we didn't," Fiona said, taking his hand. "That is what matters. We kept faith and we found each other, and now we have this beautiful life." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and Fletcher's reputation as an honest cattleman grew. They hired more help and expanded the operation, buying adjacent land when it became available. Fiona became a pillar of the Truckee community, teaching at the school, organizing church events, helping newcomers settle into the area. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, Fiona gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, a dark-haired, green-eyed little girl who had her mother's smile and her father's determination. 2 years after that came another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but watched everything with solemn intelligence. Fletcher and Fiona's love deepened with each passing year, strengthened by what they had overcome to be together and by the life they had built. They still rode out together when they could, still talked late into the night, still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt that first day in St. Louis. They told their children the story of how they met, how they had to wait and fight and never give up, And the children grew up understanding that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, something worth fighting for. On a summer evening when Thomas was 10, Clara was 7, and James was 5, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Thomas was reading to his younger siblings, his voice stumbling over the bigger words but determined to get the story right. Fletcher and Fiona sat together on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You remember that first day at the Sacramento laundry?" Fiona asked quietly. "When you walked in and I thought I was hallucinating from the heat," Fletcher chuckled. "I remember being terrified you would tell me to leave, that 6 months had been too long and you had changed your mind." "I could never have changed my mind," Fiona said. "Not about you. Even when everything was falling apart, even when I thought I might not make it, the idea of you waiting for me kept me going. You were my North Star, Fletcher. You were what guided me home. And you were worth every day of waiting," Fletcher said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Every single day, Fiona. I would do it all again without hesitation." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Thomas read, watching the children, feeling the peace of a life well lived. The ranch sprawled out before them, fertile and thriving. The mountains stood eternal in the distance. The sky blazed with color, and the air was sweet with the smell of pine and wildflowers. Years continued to pass in the way they do when life is good, each season bringing its own rhythms and rituals. Thomas grew tall and serious, taking on more responsibility around the ranch. Clara became a gifted rider, fearless and free, and talked constantly of becoming a teacher like her mother. James showed an aptitude for working with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse with patience and gentle hands. Fletcher's hair began to gray at the temples, and Fiona found laugh lines forming around her eyes, marks of a life filled with joy. They attended weddings and funerals, celebrated births and mourned losses, became the kind of steady presence in Truckee that people looked to for wisdom and support. Frank married late in life, bringing his wife to Sunday dinners at Fletcher and Fiona's house, and the family grew larger, more connected. When Thomas turned 18, he asked to go to San Francisco to study business, wanting to learn how to help expand the ranch's operations. Fletcher and Fiona were reluctant to let him go but proud of his ambition. They sent him off with their blessing and letters of introduction, and found the house felt too empty without his steady presence. But he came home for holidays and summers, full of new ideas and energy, and it was clear he would be an asset to the ranch when he returned for good. Clara did indeed become a teacher, taking over classes at the Truckee school and bringing fresh energy to the education of the town's children. She was beloved by her students and respected by the other teachers. She also fell in love with a young man who worked at the lumber mill, a kind, hard-working fellow named David, and when they married, Fletcher walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face, remembering the day he had married Fiona and grateful that his daughter had found a good man to build a life with. James stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father, learning every aspect of the operation. He had a gift for breeding cattle, understanding bloodlines and traits in a way that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the area. He was quiet but confident, and Fletcher knew the ranch would be in good hands when he was ready to pass it on their 20th wedding anniversary. Fletcher took Fiona back to the train station in Truckee. Morris had long since retired, but the station was still there, looking much the same as it had all those years ago. They stood on the platform where Fletcher had waited for 6 months, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "I stood right here," he said quietly, "every morning for 181 days, right here on this spot watching for you, I cannot imagine what that was like, Fiona said, leaning back against him. The not knowing, the waiting, the fear that I might never come. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, Fletcher admitted. But it was also the simplest. I loved you, I had promised to wait, so I waited. There was never really a choice. There is always a choice, Fiona said, turning in his arms to face him. You could have given up. You could have moved on. But you chose to have faith, and that made all the difference. They kissed there on the platform, older now but no less in love. And if anyone had been watching, they would have seen a love story written in every gentle touch, every soft word, every look that passed between them. As they grew older, Fletcher and Fiona began to slow down, letting the children take over more of the daily operations of the ranch. They still rode out together when the weather was good, though not as far or as fast as they once had. They spent more time in the garden Fiona had planted, growing vegetables and flowers, enjoying the simple pleasure of working with the soil. They read to each other in the evenings, Fletcher's eyesight not what it once was, and talked about their life with the kind of contentment that came from knowing they had built something meaningful. Grandchildren came, Thomas marrying a woman he met in San Francisco and bringing her home to Truckee, where they had 3 children in quick succession. Clara and David had twins, boys who were wild and loud and brought chaos and joy wherever they went. James married a rancher's daughter from Nevada, and they settled on a portion of the land Fletcher had given them, building their own house and starting their own herd. Fletcher and Fiona's house filled with family on Sundays, 3 generations gathering for meals that lasted hours, for stories and laughter, and the comfortable chaos of a family that loved each other. They watched their grandchildren grow, passed on the stories of their own journey, taught them about the importance of keeping promises and fighting for what mattered. On a crisp autumn morning when Fletcher was 65 and Fiona was 63, they stood together in the cemetery on the edge of town, saying goodbye to Frank, who had passed peacefully in his sleep. It was a reminder of mortality, of time's passage, but also of how lucky they had been to have so many good years. "We are getting old," Fletcher said as they walked home, his hand firmly in Fiona's. "We are," she agreed, "but we are getting old together, which is all I ever wanted." They continued that way for several more years, slowing down gradually but still engaged with life, still present for their family, still deeply in love. Fletcher's hair went completely white, and Fiona's hands developed arthritis that made sewing difficult, but they adapted, found new ways to enjoy their days, and never took for granted the gift of having each other. On a spring morning very much like the one when they had married, Fletcher woke to find Fiona already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the ranch. He got up and joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, a gesture that had become so natural over the decades that he didn't even think about it. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how different my life would have been if I had given up," Fiona said. "If I had let the obstacles stop me, if I had decided it was too hard and stayed in Sacramento or gone back to St. Louis. I would have missed all of this. All these years with you, our children, our grandchildren, this life we built. It terrifies me to think how close I came to losing it all." "But you didn't give up," Fletcher said. "You fought through everything and you made it here and we got this life. That is what matters." "I fought because you were waiting," Fiona said. "Because I knew that somewhere out there you were standing on that platform, keeping your promise." "That faith, Fletcher, it saved me. It gave me something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart." "And you saved me too," Fletcher said. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working and existing but not really living. You gave me purpose, gave me a reason to build something more than just a ranch. You gave me a family, a life worth living. Everything I am, everything I have, it is because you fought your way to me." They stood together in the window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. From downstairs came the sounds of the household waking up, Thomas and his family visiting for the week, grandchildren laughing and running through the house. The ranch spread out before them, green and alive, a testament to decades of work and care. "Do you ever regret it?" Fiona asked. "Waiting for me. All those days at the station, not knowing if I would ever come." Fletcher turned her to face him, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Those 6 months were the price I paid for a lifetime with you, and it was the best bargain I ever made. I would wait 6 years, 60 years, if that was what it took. You are worth everything, Fiona. You always have been." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and Fletcher thought about how many kisses they had shared over the years, thousands upon thousands, and yet each one still felt like a gift. They had grown old together, their bodies changing, their faces marked by time, but the love between them had only deepened, strengthened by every challenge overcome, every joy shared, every promise kept. The years continued to be kind to them. They saw all their grandchildren grow into adults, saw some of them marry and start families of their own. The ranch remained strong, managed now primarily by James and Thomas working together, their different skills complementing each other perfectly. Clara's children became teachers and ranchers and shopkeepers, contributing to Truckee's continued growth. The town itself had evolved over the decades, more civilized now but still retaining the spirit of the frontier. When Fletcher was 72, he suffered a fall from his horse that left him bedridden for several weeks. Fiona nursed him through it with the same determination she had shown in reaching him all those years ago, refusing to entertain any possibility that he wouldn't recover fully. And recover he did, though he moved slower afterwards, finally accepting that his body had limits. Fiona's health remained good, though she tired more easily. They spent their days quietly now, content with each other's company, with visits from family, with the simple pleasures of a life well lived. They still slept in the same bed they had shared since their wedding night, still reached for each other in the darkness, still found comfort in the familiar warmth of the other's presence. On a summer evening when Fletcher was 78 and Fiona was 76, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, watching another sunset paint the mountains. The whole family had gathered for Thomas's 50th birthday, and the house was full of noise and life. But for a moment, Fletcher and Fiona had escaped to the porch, stealing a few minutes alone together. 50 years, Fletcher said, shaking his head in wonder. "We have been together for 50 years, Fiona, half a century." "Best 50 years of my life," Fiona said, squeezing his hand. "Though I still remember those 6 months of hell getting to you," Fletcher laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I remember the 6 months of waiting for you, worst time of my life, best ending though." "We made a good choice," Fiona said. "Choosing to believe, choosing to wait, choosing each other even when it was hard." "The only choice that mattered," Fletcher agreed. They sat in comfortable silence until Clara came out to call them in for cake, and they went inside together, moving slowly but moving together, the way they had always done. The party continued late into the night, and Fletcher and Fiona sat at the heart of it, surrounded by the family they had created, the legacy of their love. The seasons turned as they always did. Autumn brought its blaze of color, winter its blanket of snow, spring its renewal, summer its warmth. Fletcher and Fiona moved through them all, their lives following the gentle rhythm of age, each day a gift they never took for granted. When Fletcher was 81, He woke one morning and knew, with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end, that his time was growing short. His heart, the doctor said, was wearing out. There was no pain, just a gradual winding down like a clock running out of spring. He told Fiona, and she cried but didn't argue with fate. They had always been honest with each other, and they would not start hiding truths now. They spent those final weeks surrounded by family, everyone gathering to say goodbye in their own way. Fletcher made sure his affairs were in order, made sure Fiona would be taken care of, made sure each child and grandchild knew how proud he was of them. But mostly, he and Fiona just sat together, holding hands, talking about their life, remembering the journey that had brought them to this final chapter. "I am not afraid," Fletcher told her one evening as they lay in bed, her head on his shoulder the way she had slept for 53 years. "I have had the most wonderful life. I have loved and been loved. I have no regrets." "I am afraid," Fiona admitted. "Not of you dying, but of being without you. You have been my partner for so long, Fletcher. I do not know how to be just myself anymore." "You will never be just yourself," Fletcher said gently. "You will be yourself with 53 years of us woven into your soul. I will always be part of you, Fiona, just like you will always be part of me. Death can take my body, but it cannot take what we built together. That is eternal." On a quiet morning in September, with the aspens turning gold on the mountains and the air crisp with the promise of autumn, Fletcher Campbell died peacefully in his sleep, Fiona's hand in his. The whole town mourned, and the funeral filled the church and spilled out into the street, a testament to a life well lived and a man well loved. Fiona stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and watched as they lowered Fletcher into the earth. She thought about the young cowboy who had waited for her at the station, who had kept his promise even when everyone thought he was crazy. She thought about the life they had built, the love they had shared, and she knew that while this was an ending, it was also a completion. They had done what they set out to do all those years ago in St. Louis. They had built a life together, raised a family, loved each other through everything. She lived 3 more years, years in which she was never lonely despite Fletcher's absence. The family surrounded her with love and care, and she found peace in knowing that their story had ended as it should, with a love that had endured everything. She told the story often to the great-grandchildren, making sure they understood that real love required courage and faith and the willingness to fight for what mattered. On a spring morning very much like the one when she had married Fletcher, Fiona Sinclair Campbell died quietly in her sleep, a smile on her face. They buried her beside Fletcher, and the whole town turned out again, mourning the passing of a woman who had become a legend in her own right, the woman who had fought her way across half a continent to reach the man who waited. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But the legend of Fletcher and Fiona remained, the cowboy who waited every single day and the woman who arrived 6 months late but arrived nonetheless, and the love that had been strong enough to overcome everything. In the Truckee cemetery, their graves stood side by side, the headstones weathered now by decades of mountain weather. And if you visited on the right kind of day, when the aspens were turning gold and the air was crisp and clear, you might imagine you could feel it still, the echo of a love that had been strong enough to change destiny, patient enough to wait through the impossible, and faithful enough to believe even when belief seemed foolish. It was a love story written in waiting and fighting and never giving up, and it endured long after the last person who had known them personally was gone. A reminder that some promises are worth keeping, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it costs, no matter how impossible it seems.